Great Depression of the 30s brought distress to the farm. Prices plummeted, surpluses accumulated. In response, government initiated subsidies to support the prices of farm products. They are still with us at an estimated cost to the American taxpayer of over $21 billion this year.
It was designed to be a short-term program to take care of our burdensome supplies and to raise commodity prices, and that's the reason I went into it.
Obviously, many farmers, big and small, real farmers and professionals quick to cash in on a good thing, have benefited from these programs. They would loudly protest the end of these benefits, but everyone else would reap both lower taxes and lower food bills.
We have higher productivity, and that should help the consumer. The problem is that the government has intervened and put support on milk, which means they guarantee the price that is going to be paid for powdered milk and butter and cheese and things like that. And in doing this, the government has made it very profitable to produce milk, and we can produce all the milk we want. We know we're going to get a price for it, so we just keep producing, and we produce more and more and more. Therefore, we've generated a huge surplus, and the government can't afford to keep buying this surplus. And so I think in the end, the best thing would be for the government just to get out of it, allow supply and demand to take over. Of course, if there's too much milk, then the price is going to go down, and this is good for the consumer. If there's great demand for milk, then the price is going to go up, and we'll produce more.
Some farmers would just as soon get rid of the artificial prop of government support, but the tyranny of the status quo has so far prevented that from happening.
Subsidies to agriculture. Those are a major matter. They amounted in the last year to about $12 billion, if my memory serves me right. They have been getting larger rather than smaller. They go to subsidize people who produce everything from tobacco to dairy products to wheat to corn, you name it, and there's a subsidy program for them. Of course, it's not labeled subsidy. It's always labeled a price support program. And the form which it takes is that the government guarantees the farmer that if the price at which he can sell his product falls below a certain level, the government essentially buys up the surplus, buys up what can't be sold at that price and stores them. And as a result, we have mountains of goods, cheese, dairy products, and storage. And it's worth noting that this is a phenomenon not only in the United States, but around much of the Western world. Europe has a butter mountain, which it's trying to dispose of, and so on. Now the question is what can we say about agricultural subsidies? Are they an appropriate element of a welfare state?
Well, it seems a little simple for those of us who have no experience in with farmers to say that we're absolutely opposed to agricultural price supports. But I think that if we had a little bit more familiarity with what life was like when you were at the mercy of the weather and you had no idea whether you were going to be able to sell your crop from one year to another because you didn't know in advance what your crop was going to be like. It seems like something of a reasonable way to try to stabilize people's income source.
Well, if I understand your argument, you're saying that the government should provide crop insurance, which is a very different thing from price support.
How is it different?
Unemployment insurance is a very different thing from guaranteeing you a price for your labor.
Well, I guess that might be a preferred alternative way to make sure that people were not going to starve when they had a bad year, when everyone had a good year. And
well, if there's one thing that the farmers are pretty well protected against, it's starving.
Although they're losing their houses and their farms.
Yes, many of them are losing their houses because they have borrowed a great deal of money on the basis of their houses. We tend to think, you see, the image you people are projecting is the image that is common in the United States, for good reasons, of the small pioneer farmer on a small plot of land that is scraping the ground to earn a living. Now, in fact, most farmers in the United States who are really commercial farmers have properties and assets that have to be measured in the millions of dollars, not in the tens of thousands of dollars.
One of the reasons that I presume that we provide those kinds of subsidies, and I think it's not always the case that they're referred to as something other than subsidies, is that we want to ensure that people stay in the business of agriculture and that there's a certain diversity of products available.
If we
There's a
want to
certain-
assure that people stay in the business of agriculture, we've been doing a lousy job because the number of people in agriculture has been declining drastically. You know, there's no industry in the United States which comes closer to being a high-tech industry. At the outset of the American Republic in 1776 or 8, it took 19 farmers to feed themselves and one other person, 95% of the population. Today, it takes less than one farmer to feed himself and 19 other persons.
Right. I understand. There have been, in fact, lots of small farmers dropping out of the business and the agricultural business remaining. Perhaps we could change to a more central question, which I have for you, which is that you characterize this as though the $12 billion which we spend in subsidies is a kind of loss, and that if we didn't spend that, we would be better off. And what I would like you to do is flesh that out a little bit.
Well, the effect of spending the $12 billion is mostly to induce farmers to spend money to grow crops which go into storage. Now, who benefits from that?
Or which might be, in fact, sold abroad.
Well, that's a more difficult problem. If we try to sell them abroad, we can only sell them at the world price. The world price is below the domestic support price. And so, in effect, the difference is precisely the subsidy that is being paid to farmers. Now, if we offer a higher price at home than is available in the world market, it has to take an act of government to export. See, let's suppose we had no price supports. We weren't spending this $12 billion. There would be the same price abroad and at home. You would have a world market for all of these products. And what wasn't sold at home would be sold abroad, and we would, in fact, be exporting at least as much as we're now exporting. In addition, however, the program makes food more expensive and imposes a cost on all of the people in the community who consume food. Agriculture is one of our major export industries. We have had a very large movement toward protection. And this carries us back to the automobile industry, because here there is a very close connection. The argument is that Japanese automobiles have been coming into the country and taking jobs away from American workers in Detroit. And we ought to do something about it. We ought to impose a tariff on it, or we ought to impose a quota. Or what we have done is to have what's called a voluntary quota on the part of the exports from Japan. Now, the question is, that's another component of the welfare state. And what is there to say about that?
The underlying claim is that we would all be better off if there were no constraints placed on anything. And I think that a certain comparison can be made between the American governmental support structure and support structures of West Germany and Japan. It's not clear to me that part of that comparison usually ends up saying that Japanese are better off than Americans because of the competitive advantage that they've gained in the car industry. Japan, as well as the United States, imposes similar kinds of constraints on what they import.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Most countries around the world.
Right. The question is, if we're talking about our position vis-a-vis Japan, and both of us have certain kinds of export and import quotas, can we clearly tie the fact that we're worse off to those export and import quotas?
Well, let's for a moment come back, and I want to tie it back into agriculture and ask a question. Let's suppose that we did do everything the automobile industry asked. We cut off imports of automobiles from Japan. Who would suffer?
Those of us who drive Toyotas.
And who else?
And who else?
Yeah, who else?
Oh, I'm not sure what...
The farmers. You said they were a big export industry.
Oh.
Where does Japan get the money to buy their exports? Japan is a big importer of food from the United States. Where does it get its money?
Well, I agree that they're interconnected. There would also be certain people who might benefit, those who would not be displaced.
Of course, I'm not saying it would be. I didn't say they wouldn't. Right. Of course, if you cut off all, people who would benefit would be the automobile workers, the steel workers in the United States who would produce American cars instead of Japanese cars. The people who would lose, obviously, are the people who buy the cars and drive them. But the thing that's more interesting, and the reason I brought it in this connection, is because of its tie-in with agriculture. Mm-hmm. Because I suspect that if you went to farmers, and ask them the question, how would you be affected by increase in the tariff on automobiles? Very few of them would say, my God, that would do me a great deal of harm. For at least 200 years, since Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776, there has been an almost unanimous agreement among economists that tariffs impose a net loss. And that hasn't prevented country after country from having tariffs and adopting them.
We can't guarantee that there will be a tariff-free market for our
Of
products
course
abroad.
not. Of course not. And two wrongs don't make a right. It would be better for the world if all the other countries would also go in for no tariffs. But even if they go in for tariffs, we are better off not having tariffs.